Right, so I am here with Katie John Went. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Um, Katie, tell us about your personal background. Where did you grow up? When did you know you were trans? What are your pronouns so I don't offend you?
Oh, that's a fun question straight off. Well, the easy bits, I guess, is I was born in Luton and Dunstable Hospital, and grew up in Harpenden, went to school in St Albans, so that's Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire border townlands.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I guess kind of when did I first know I was trans? I don't think I ever did because I didn't have the internet when I grew up because I'm 58. And that means we didn't have those sources of information. We couldn't just Google stuff. There were no books around it. But I always felt
Okay.
I was different from a very young age, I guess primary school onwards. But I don't know that I necessarily felt I was the opposite of my birth sex. I just always felt I didn't fit in to my birth sex. And in fact, when I was born, it took them 2 hours to decide on my birth sex because they couldn't get it right first time round because I had a hormone disorder meant I was developmentally slow. I don't mean in the brain, I mean in the hormone department.
Okay, so
So I haven't answered the question about what pronouns are.
no, but you've given me another question.
Oh, right, okay.
So, how, if I say how did you know you were different, that's a bit loaded. What is that feeling like of knowing you're different? Oh, not to be like rude about it. I'm just trying to trip over some words, obviously.
It's like wanting to belong and not finding anyone like you. Whether that was down to attitude, appearance. I mean, I could look at myself in the mirror and go, oh, yes, you're a boy. But I just did not fit in with other boys. And the people I played with were actually girls who played football and climbed trees. So it wasn't about gendered pastimes. But it was like that, I guess tomboy girls were more my tribe than were either girly girls or, manly boys. I don't know. But when
Right.
you're growing up, I was growing up in the 70s, and there really were only sheep and goats, and it wasn't really obvious there were other ways to be. And to survive, you had to fit in, and I really didn't feel like I fitted in.
Okay, so you've worked with organisations like Human Library, um, Gender Agenda, is that right?
Yeah.
And Pick My Brain centres on creating spaces for respectful dialogue. What does respectful dialogue mean in this day and age? Because this, I trip over me personally, I cannot keep up with the LGBT and everything that gets added onto the end. He says sounded like a right winger. So how does one stay up to date and be unoffensive?
Okay, I mean, I actually created a website at one point, and then I stopped updating it because I realized it was just getting out of hand. It was called LGBTIQ.xyz
Right.
because of the alphabet soup. And I just thought almost, not for a joke, but for an educational exploration, because there used to be something called, well, there still is, presumably Tumblr. But
I think Tumblr's still a thing. It was a social media.
The kids half my age had Tumblrs all about different flags, different sexualities, different genders, and then actually gradually grew beyond that to different romantic relationship attachments, to different neurodiversities, and there's a flag for everything, and everything is about flags these days.
Unless it's the Union Jack.
Well, it's meant so many different things to so many people. And if I would gladly fly the Union Jack, if it meant we're welcoming refugees like we did in during World War II or something like that. I think it means different things to different people. And around sport, we can be really positive around it. But I mean, I live in Norwich, and for the last 3 days, people have been hanging flags and taking them down. And I saw another friend post like, "I've just gone out and bought 100 flags to replace the other flags." It's got flag wars going on. It's gone a little bit crazy. So respectful conversation, though, for me, is about being able to talk about ideas, challenge ideologies. But the respect bit means I don't have to agree with you, but I do have to believe in conversation, dialogue, and debate. And if you go into a debate with the only purpose being to win, that's still not a real debate, because basically you're saying, I'm not really planning on listening to you, I'm planning on winning.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go into conversation and dialogue with a view to understand what the other person thinks, not in order to respond, but in order to understand, I think you also win that aspect that the other person might choose to understand you. And mutual understanding, I think is one of the glues for a decent, cohesive kind of society that gets on, but doesn't have to agree. And I think when you start asking for agreement and what some people call kind of compelled speech, when you start saying you have to agree with me, and I think that was the overreach of many different ideologies, including trans, when you demand that people think the same as you. I love diversity of thought. It's
So
one of the
does
it's one of the
so
diversities we don't really get to enjoy.
so where do you stand on Jordan B. Peterson? Because he refused to call someone by their preferred pronouns, was it?
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess I didn't answer directly the question of what my preferred pronouns are. My preferred pronouns are, be kind, in that sense. And I don't mean that in a loose sense. What I mean is, if you talk to someone face to face, you don't need pronouns. If you're talking on a panel with a variety of people, yeah, obviously respect the person you're sharing a panel with. But if that's a problem for you because of your ideology, I remember having this discussed at Battle of Ideas one time. Someone said, what are your pronouns and what do you want to use? And I said, well, I'm surprised to be asked that here. I thought you guys didn't care about that. They said, no, we do care about being respectful, though. And I said, well, actually, I really don't mind. I don't want someone to be forced to use something they're not comfortable with. So if we're on stage, you can just say, oh, I agree with what Katie said, or I disagree with what Katie said. You don't have to say, I agree or disagree with what she said, what they said, what he said. I kind of jokingly say, my preferred pronouns are they, she, he, in that order, anything but he in capital letters. And what I mean by that is shouty pronouns. If you're yelling at someone, you're a he, you're a him, it's an angry pronoun. So I like unangry pronouns. And she is, if you were to call me she, for example, that's really polite of you, but it doesn't mean anything to me because I don't mean I need a woman to call me she to feel affirmed as a trans woman, which is language I don't even use anymore. I don't call myself a trans woman. I call myself a trans person. But if a woman calls me she, to me, that's saying, hey, I accept you, I'm inclusive, you're part of the sisterhood, I know you're not born a woman, but as far as I'm concerned, you're part of our tribe, that's cool. So if a woman calls me she, it means something. If a guy calls me she, it's not the pronoun that he has the right to give me anyway.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think I sort of follow it, yeah. So you've led an interesting life. Before we came on camera, you were saying you studied theology, is that right?
Well, I studied economics and computing and statistics at UCL, but then ran off to do theology, Bible college, Hebrew, became a fundamentalist Christian and a missionary and a preacher.
How long did that last for?
Oh gosh, I guess from about age 18 to my mid-30s.
Okay, so
20 years almost.
Just for the purposes of the video, just for my own mental following as well. So you grew up knowing you were, shall we politely, slightly different, yeah, but then you went into priesthood?
Well, it wasn't that. So I guess during my teen years, I went to an all-boys school. My dad was working class, but he wanted me to have the education he never got. He loved education, but left it at 15, or didn't have a choice because education finished back then. And so he did everything to scrimp and save and not go on any holidays for 10 years so that I could go to get an education that he wished he could have had and wanted to give to me. And it was an all-boys school. So that was another way of hiding in plain sight, in the sense that I didn't feel like I belonged to the boys' club entirely. And yet one of the best ways to kind of not deal with that is, be in a boys' school and never deal with it. And then beyond that, when I went to university onwards, I got involved in, charismatic, quite fundamentalist Christianity, literal recent creation, Adam and Eve, literal, all that kind of thing. And that was another way to go hide who you are and don't deal with it. Bury it as deep as you can at the bottom of the ocean, lock the key, and then hope it goes away. And then also get married. Think, oh, it'll go away if I get married.
Did you get married?
I got married to a trainee medical doctor at the time. Eventually, she became a psychiatrist. Before we got married, we both said we should kind of do the Christian thing and clean out our closets. So we went to kind of Christian counselling first, and I mentioned in the Christian counselling that amongst other things, I had cross-dressed. In Christian terms, I'd done all the naughty things, like, oh dear, I'd looked at porn once or something. I'd had a relationship. I wouldn't call it a relationship. I had an unhinged relationship with a guy at school for a while.
While you were at school, the all boys school.
Yeah, the all boys school. I was very immature and I hadn't even reached puberty. He was theoretically the same age as me, but was about 3 years further on emotional and physical maturity, and he'd gone through puberty. So I was, because of this puberty disorder, I was under a hospital for 7 years.
Right.
I was under a pediatrician's and in a human growth hormone clinic.
Okay.
Because they were going to pump me full of human growth hormone to make me grow. But around
that's really bad for your heart, from what I've read.
Well, literally at the point they were about to put that on me, my puberty said, no, if you're going to put that on me, my puberty's going to show up. And it finally showed up. But so I was in an unempowered relationship. I had no power in the relationship. To be honest, I felt abused by it. And when I got out of it, he then pursued me with a knife for 6 months at the school gates. So it was an abusive relationship, and I was completely confused. I think I was just enamored of the fact that someone liked me rather than caring whether they were male or female.
Okay. So just to fast forward a bit, you've been on GB News, Talk TV, you've done TED Talks, radio, this podcast, and tried your hand at stand-up comedy as well.
Yeah.
How did you fall into that? Because that's a bit of a leap from interviews and panel shows.
Yeah, well, the stand-up comedy was about 10, 14 years ago. There was quite a good local comedy circuit in Norwich, where I live now. And I tried my hand 3 or 4 times at it and realised that actually doing comedy is probably harder than coming out as trans. It's tough. You couldn't literally die on stage. I found in the end that I tried to be too clever, and only people who were friends laughed at the jokes because they got them, and I tried to be too intellectual in my humour.
Is that when you were trying to bring the edutainment to the fore?
Yes.
Right.
But actually, I find what people say, and I think it's true, that I find I'm more funny naturally off the cuff in the moment than trying to create a comedy script. So eventually what I didn't like about comedy was it is scripted.
Mm-hmm.
I'd much rather, tell a shaggy dog story, or find something slightly naughty, funny in an old British way in many respects. And I find humour brilliant. And I think it's a peculiarly, the way we do it in Britain is different to many other nations. And I think it's quite a leveler. And if you can get someone who disagrees with you ideologically to laugh with you, and even occasionally laugh at you, but together, people let their guards down, and then you can actually have a more heart-to-heart conversation, not just a head-butting one.
So, what's the worst experience you've had as a trans person?
Ooh.
If you had to look and soul search for holy shit, that was horrendous.
I think
other than someone chasing you with a knife, obviously.
Yeah. I think I've had it a lot easier than many. And sometimes that's because I give the appearance of not caring. I do care. I think it's because it gets to me less than others, and I get less stick for it because I don't want to use the phrase, but I guess the word that comes to mind is less precious about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't take offence, because I don't demand people treat me a particular way. Don't call me with particular language. I just want to be treated as hopefully a decent human being and respected as a person. That said, some of the things I may have said 3, 5, 7, 10 years ago may have been different along those lines. But I think even from 2011, 2012 was the first years I started splitting ranks with many of the trans activists, of whom I was one. But I started to say, but I don't agree with you there, or I think that's going too fast, or I don't think that's right, or I have some concerns about this. So I think I began to break ranks actually 13 odd years ago around things like self-ID and other things. So my actual experiences, though, I would say probably one of the most hardest experiences was quite recently, literally just under a year ago. And it's fairly well known on Twitter as well.
For those of us not on there.
Yeah. So I went to, we were doing actually a human library event in the Forum in Norwich. I needed the toilet. I went to the toilet. The disabled that I normally use, partly because I am disabled, not just because I'm avoiding gender, was in use. So I literally went to the next loo down, because the Forum is a place that, is quite comfortable with trans people using the toilets according to their gender. Now this is pre-Supreme Court, so it was last year, and I went to the women's toilet, went in, peed, came out. But as I came out, another woman in the toilet did the shouty capital hymn, as it were, and said, "There's a man in here. You are a man.
Right.
You know, get out now." And I just felt like shamed on the spot. You know, I wasn't trying to be something I'm not. I was just trying to pee in peace and leave. But the whole thing blew up on social media. She called me a lurker. She said I was there upsetting little children. But in fact, the mother of a young child who was in there told her off for upsetting her child. And she actually posted on Twitter later saying, "I met Katie John Went, a man, in the toilets of the forum, and all of the women supported him." And that's what was interesting, is that, you know, she felt, I think, that they've been coerced by ideology. I think that most people just want to get on, and I wasn't doing anything wrong. But since the Supreme Court thing, yeah, I would naturally avoid a women's toilet, and it's quite rare that I would use them anyway. But that was a shaming thing. And I was pursued outside of it back into the forum, and she tried to film me. And then a whole group of women literally gathered around me to prevent her from filming me.
So women came to your aid?
100%. And I mean, you could say it's because Norwich is a nice place. I think women, they shouldn't have to be, but I think they may be slightly more naturally protective. And I think they just saw someone being attacked, and it didn't matter whether it was about trans or anything. And they gathered around like lionesses.
Okay, so.
But I've never been actually, you know, attacked or abused for being trans. I think I think I've had it easy. Partly, probably, as I said, because I don't think I tried to be something.
So, I want to really dig down to your views on so-called trans youth, trans children, and the Tavistock. And that seems a bit loaded given those three topics. So, what's your view on trans youth, as the term is?
I mean,
do you think that's a thing?
I used the term at Battle of Ideas 2 years ago, actually, and someone said to me, "There's no such thing." And we landed on the compromise that there are youth who question their gender. And I said, I'm comfortable switching to that language. There are gender questioning youth.
And well, that's why you get tomboy girls, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's gender non-conforming and gender questioning, two different things. Gender non-conforming means you're not conforming to the stereotype of how a girl is meant to be, how a boy is meant to be. And gender questioning means you're actually questioning whether you are that gender. And sometimes that can be down to the fact that there isn't the freedom to question the stereotypes, to question the roles, to question the norms.
Mm-hmm.
And if those things are like that, then sometimes you don't feel like the freedom to do things that might be more traditionally of a different gender. So I think those things blur, and that's one of the reasons I do believe that we have to take gender questioning youth slowly, because those things change as you grow up, as puberty hits, as sexuality hits. So I've always said this, that I believe, and I still believe this of myself, I'm not speaking on behalf of other trans people, in an ideal world, in some kind of sci-fi future utopia, yeah, you could pick your own gender and no one would care, pick your own species even. But in the real world that we actually live in, I believe to some extent, particularly if you want the state to fund it, you know, transitioning, not being trans, but transitioning medically and chemically should be a last resort. Okay. And I think one needs to, but again, I come from a heavily loaded position on this because, you know, I was a Christian and I went into Christian therapy, I went into conversion therapy, went into deliverance therapy, prayer and healing. Then I went to see psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists, and to all of them I said, "Can you stop me being trans?" And I literally didn't want to be trans. So I feel that I'm very loaded when I'm saying being trans should be a last resort, because I'm speaking from personal experience and it was a last resort for me. Mm-hmm. Having said that, once one has done it, hindsight's a bitch, and you kind of...
Well, you can swear on my channel if you wish.
Hindsight's a bitch. And you actually, in retrospect, and so I transitioned, I came out at 39 / I was outed, and hormones in my mid-40s, and had surgery age 49, which is nearly 10 years ago now. But if I had my life as a do-over, I'd have done it again earlier. And yes, I would have loved to have avoided even the male puberty I eventually got late.
Mhm.
And I would love to have avoided it, but I don't think it's safe to give that option to anyone. And we don't are, we start to get hormonal and angsty and existential, and who we are as teenagers in our 13 onwards maybe, and yet at the same time our prefrontal cortex doesn't mature until 23, 24, 25, and that's the bit that's a little bit more rational, that says, why did you do that with your hormones earlier? So I don't think it's safe to, as it were, fully transition all the way at a young age. I do believe you have to have a degree of emotional maturity and a degree of, which the psychiatry says as well, a degree of permanence, and not just the 2-year rule. I think you need to see, is this undoable, and is this going to be with me for life, and is the only way I can live like this to actually transition? So in that sense, I think youth trans should be a very, very cautious thing. And for that, I get a lot of stick, because obviously youth trans disagree with me.
So,
but their parents don't.
Well, during my research before this interview, you're very proud to be on the political left.
I've been everywhere.
Are you still associating with the left? Do you think the LGBT is being used as a political tool?
I believe I'm disillusioned with all politics, because they use everything as a tool. My first legal vote was Margaret Thatcher. I voted Labour for the first time when Jeremy Corbyn was enamouring the youth. I wouldn't vote for him now.
What changed with him?
I think it's a combination of him being unelectable and me not always agreeing. I don't find I can agree with anybody wholly. I voted Green, I voted Lib Dem, I voted Tory, and I did one of those things you get every election called, what's it called? Policies, not parties, which I find fascinating. So they take like 4 policies or 5 policies, or the same one policy, but espoused by 5 different parties, take their words from their manifestos around it. And it might be their attitude to Europe, their attitude to immigration, their attitude to the environment. And I remember filling it out one year within the last 10 years where I have been of the left, shall we say. And my answers made me, so that's been about 10 years ago, because my answers said I was 75% UKIP and 25% Green, or vice versa.
Okay.
But the whole point, it didn't matter, because I wasn't voting for either of those that year. But I aligned with their policies when I didn't know who said them.
That's interesting.
Because I do believe in small government, but I do believe in...
And that's a conservative trait.
Yes. So what my background's economics. I've been an entrepreneur in business. I ran an IT company for a while, small one. And then Google burnt it. And they bought out Google Translate, made it free. And I couldn't actually sell translation software anymore. But I do believe in a welfare state that helps the people who need it most. I do believe in, I guess, some of that Toriness of being self-made and working and that kind of thing as well. I do believe in a defence policy. I do believe in criminal justice. I do believe, though, in a positive attitude to immigrants, because they have been, like they have been in America, they're the backbone of some of the things that are positive about society in terms, and also half the areas of society where we lack employment are areas where immigrants tend to fill those roles.
So, you mentioned that earlier when we talked about the flag, if the flag meant that we were welcoming refugees. Yeah. So this wasn't meant to be a political discussion, but what's your view on the small boats then? And the hotels.
Yeah, okay, so the hotel, I actually kind of do believe that, I think they're going down the route, aren't they, of moving everyone to army camps rather than hotels. That's the last policy I heard that was about to come out.
Yeah, that was recent.
Because we have so many empty army camps.
And there's more of these people, I say these people with respect, who have come across the channel, and we've got armed forces now.
Yeah,
so figures-wise.
Yeah,
so if it was an army,
in the army camp, it beats sticking them on a container boat off Plymouth or wherever they were going to do that other boat thing. But I think that's not a bad idea. People shouldn't be coming here for a luxury life. They should be coming here for a life, in that sense. And because they're fleeing no life, they're fleeing death, they're fleeing whatever. I think having some of those checks and balances is absolutely fine. I do believe that if you've traversed through 3 safe countries to get here, I have to question, why didn't you stop in one of those? And if the case is due to the fact you've got family here, you already speak English, but you don't speak French, Italian, or German or whatever, then there's an argument that you would find it easier to settle here if you already speak English. So there's some arguments for that. I think I am positive around immigration though, because I mean, Elon Musk talked about the fact that one of the biggest issues we face is a declining population, or and the future problem of society is we won't have simultaneously we've either got too many people of the wrong kind in some people's language, or not enough people of the right kind. But population is a future problem, and we don't have a replacement population.
No, we're below replacement.
So we're always, and for those who understand that the demographics of that, it means we're always going to need net immigration. If you want to have someone pay for you when you're retired, you need net immigration in work, paying taxes, replacing the population, maintaining that reasonable level. And we're never going to do it as a British birth population. We do need immigration on that grounds alone.
That being said, I saw a video of Ben Habib recently saying that he would have a policy called Bonk for Britain, which I found very funny, especially someone like Ben, who's very well spoken, saying that. I did find that quite humorous, where he would adopt, I think it's Sweden or somewhere like that. He would adopt a policy of the more kids you have, the less income tax you pay.
Yeah, I mean, there are.
And I think that's a winner, personally.
There are countries, I mean, that will actually pay you to have children almost and make the financial system biased to you actually having children. Or Switzerland, the tax system being biased towards one of you actually stopping working and raising the kids. That's always going to end up being the woman, of course. So I do think, though, that young people, one, having less sex, and two, they're having smaller families, and some are having no families. So
why do you think that change has come about?
Well, I think in part it's because of an equality that now exists in education, that people, go through education, get a degree, get a job, and have a career, and then actually that puts having a family as a lower priority, and or the way that families may be seen as the woman's job still. I mean, I work a lot in Scandinavia with the Human Library, and there's a far more equal kind of parenting aspect to certainly Danish kind of family life, and greater gender equality there. I don't know what their numbers are for the number of percentage who are having children, but I think it's still definitely below the replacement number. But yeah, back to the point though, I would say I'm politically homeless. My last vote was for Labour, but in South Norfolk for a county that was Tory for 75 years.
So you voted for Starmer?
Yes, and I'm disappointed.
So people can say this is your fault.
Well,
why are you disappointed?
Basically, it didn't matter who I voted for the whole 33 years I've lived in Norfolk, because it was always going to come out Tory, and it was an absolute surprise that at the last election, South Norfolk went Labour for the first time in its entire history. I used to have protest votes for most of my time living here because it made no difference who I voted for. Even when I was a Tory, I actually often voted Green when I lived here, because I didn't want even the person of the party that I voted for to have too much of a majority, because I didn't want to have anyone to have too much power. So I don't believe in large majorities. I do believe in, I don't know whether proportional representation would work. We voted against it in 2015, wasn't it? But I think some degree of coalition politics is healthy, because it forces people to talk to people they don't agree with. It forces people to have to do deals that result in less extreme policies of any kind. And it forces people to compromise. So I think healthy democracy should have more than two parties. And we now live in a 3 or 5 party situation now. I think the age of Labour and Tory dominating is probably over. I think they're going to have to do deals at the next election.
Well, we've got the rise of reform now, haven't we? So what's your view on reform?
I don't like. They are sometimes described by some people as far right. I disagree. I think far right may be in them. I think far left will be in Labour. I like the phrase further right.
Further right.
Yeah, so the further right meaning they're right of centre right Tory, which was old Tory. It makes you, when you look at the way the Tory leadership gradually from Cameron through to later ones, and you look back at it, you actually think, oh, Cameron was really liberal, so was May and things like that. So I think I think the polarization of British politics means that, you know, harder, further versions of left and right will have a stronger voice now because the centre has been decimated. If that makes any sense. The moderate centre on all sides, centre left, centre right, don't really exist. And even Labour, I would argue, what's it called, the Overton window,
Overton
where you stand still and everything else moves around.
That's right. Yeah.
I would argue that the policies that Labour are coming out with are not left wing. You know, they're barely even centrist. When you look at them, actually, you know, taking 5 billion from disabled benefits, taking increasing defence budget, and I know why, and I kind of agree with it. Policy on immigration, various other policies, the way they've, you know, what they said last year and the years before around LGBT, around trans stuff, they've backed away from. So I think one would have to position, you know, in the same way that after Tony Blair, we used to call him, you know, Blue Labour and Tory Blair.
Mm-hmm.
I think Starmer's going to get that same adage.
Okay.
It was interesting that actually some of the flag protests and the asylum seeker protests in Norwich in the last couple of weeks, the two things that united people yelling at each other across the road from each other was when they all started singing Sweet Caroline at the same time, and they all started singing Starmer is a banker.
I was there for that.
Yeah. So, but both sides kind of said, "Oh, we agree. We agree on two things. We all like Sweet Caroline, and we all think Starmer out."
So, no, you're not wrong. I was there, and there was many a strong word actually. But just bringing it back to LGBT, because you, out of the two of us, you're the expert on the subject.
I'm an expert on me.
Close enough. So, why do you think, and it might just be the online space, but it appears there's like a vitriolic hatred and a viciousness towards trans people? Why do you think that's come about? Because I grew up, I was born in the 80s. I grew up in the 90s. By 1999, none of us cared.
Yeah.
Gay, lesbian, bi, nobody cared. Why is it the trans, gets so much grief?
Okay, so I mean, I was in the closet until 39, so it's only the last 20 years I can kind of comment on, really. So 2005 onwards, I guess, and 2004 was the Gender Recognition Act. So I guess I came out at the right time. You know, laws just in my favour at that point. And over that 20 years, I would say the first decade, things gradually got better year on year for T. But also in that time, as I was frequenting LGBT places, there was a discussion of like, why is the T associated with LGBT even then? And then obviously 2014, 15, Stonewall goes LGBT. So I think what began to happen is in the last decade in particular, I would say that people didn't read the room. People didn't realize society wasn't ready for trans to go all the way. And what I mean by that is to step into that territory of self-ID. There were countries around the world that started doing self-ID from 2012, but the UK wasn't ready for it and still isn't ready for it. I believe everyone has the right to call themselves what they like, express themselves like that. Oh gosh, I sound like I'm quoting J.K. Rowling's tweet. No, love whom you like, dress how you like, call yourself what you like. But that doesn't, so be who you like doesn't necessarily entitle you to get what you want or expect everyone to call you or treat you a particular way. I believe we have, you know, if we base things on human rights rather than say trans rights, then we're basically saying you have freedom of expression. And that means.
So being trans is an expression?
Yeah, in that sense, yeah. I mean, I don't think we have to go down the route of born that way to justify it. The same language, though, was used of being gay in the past until people. It doesn't really matter whether anyone ever finds the fact that there's a gay gene. Whether being gay is born that way or a choice, it shouldn't matter because you should be free to love whom you want to love. And you should be free to dress how you like, so long as it's decent and in public in that sense. And I think describe yourself, express yourself however you like, yes. But then what does that get you? That's the bit that needs to be debated. Like, okay, so you want to call yourself this, you want to be this, you want to express yourself this way, fine. What do you think that gets you? That's where you need to talk about the intersection with other people's rights, the intersection with other people's spaces. And that was a kind of a debate I entered and also changed my mind within because I engaged with people in an era when everyone was saying no debate. And I tried to read the room and realize, okay, not everyone is ready for trans to be this crazy group of multicolored butterflies being who they want everywhere. And there were concerns, and the concerns weren't being heard. And I think the concerns then were equally magnified to the point where all trans are sexual predators, all trans are what's called AGP, all trans are this, all trans are bad, all trans are misogynist, all trans are stealing women's rights. That's not true either. I think the response to each side was to kind of polarize and call each other the worst possible things.
I think I think the last thing I heard that was derogatory, and excuse me, was a cock in a frock.
Yeah, chicks with dicks.
I think that's a term for certain movies. Actually,
it's chick flick. No, but the language I think got vicious and, as you say, vitriolic, and I think it came from, I don't want to say entitlement, but some of it sounds like it. I think younger people's activism, as opposed to older transsexuals who transitioned years ago or were just living quietly and comfortably, and their local village accepted them. I mean, I had a friend who was gay, and we used to go visit his hometown back in Wales, and he would say he was the only gay in the village.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah, and I said, well, if you're the only gay in the village, I'm the only tranny in the valley. You know, and we would go out, and if you're the odd one out, people accepted you as the eccentric. When you normalize it, that's then expecting society to say, okay, we're ready for all of you now, or more of you. And I don't think society was. Social attitudes have moved, and they had moved substantially.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the social attitude survey in 2017 said something like 70% of people were accepting of trans. But by 2020, whenever the next one was, sometime in the 2020s, it was only 55%. So there was a 20% reduction in trans acceptance because something had happened in between. And what had happened in between felt like, as they're not reading the room, trans overreach within the time that we weren't ready.
So do you think because, for lack of a better term, it was forced, people then sort of backed away from the acceptance?
Yeah, because as I've said
British,
before, we don't like to be forced to do anything.
Because as I've said before, like, forced acceptance isn't acceptance.
Yeah, exactly.
Compelling speech.
And it also doesn't mean anything. In the same way as I was saying about pronouns, if somebody doesn't want to call me she and is forced to call me she, well, it's meaningless. It's both offending them and offending me because you don't mean it. So, and I think, and I heard this a lot actually, and it was, what's that guy, Popper, talking about tolerance and things. And actually, I think British tolerance wasn't bad. Tolerance meant, I don't have to agree with you, but I'll accept you to do your own thing. When people said, I don't want tolerance, I don't want to be tolerated, I want to be accepted, and I want to be agreed with, that's when it was too far. And that's when people said, oh, no, I was happy to let you be you, but now you want me to agree that you being you is ideologically correct, as opposed to ideologically turning a blind eye. You're then saying we all have to have the same religion, and the religion of LGBT almost. Having come from a kind of a fundamentalist Christian background, I can see the reminiscences of fundamentalist ideology within even LGBT language and the way LGBT was promoted, educated. I'm not saying it is in that sense, but I'm saying it had the traits of religious behaviour and a religion that I had left behind. So I think that's why it made it easier for me to break rank. Well, because I'd broken rank with Christianity in the past, and now I'm breaking rank with LGBTianity.
So it's almost cultish then, which is probably why Andrew Gold wanted to talk to you, because he has a thing for cults on heretics.
Yeah,
this isn't a plug, Andrew. But no, that's interesting actually, looking at that side.
It's a belief. It's a belief about yourself, which I think you're entitled to. It's then you want to express that belief, which you, again, as a human right, you're entitled to. But then if you want to promote that belief, if you want to I don't mean evangelize that belief in the sense of, like, I don't think you can convert someone to being gay or something. But I guess the people who are critical of trans would say that a group of people have tried to convert people to being trans. And that's why I think, again, you need to go slow.
Wasn't that the Tavistock thing? Trans in the gay way?
Yeah. Well, I don't agree with that. I think a minority of people chose to be trans because it was better than being gay. I can tell you I would rather be gay than trans. You know, you don't have to change your body, starters. You don't have to,
more acceptance, as we've just said.
It's easier to be gay than to be trans, unless you're in a heavily religious environment. I don't think you can say that all of the young trans people are all there because they're, basically their parents would rather have a trans kid than a gay kid. No, I don't think that's true. Minority at all. And to model it on the way, say, Iran, which does, I think, the second largest number of trans ops in the world, because you can't be gay in Iran. You can be dead and gay, but if you want to be alive, one of you has to trans.
No, I have heard that, and again, I've never been to Iran, so I don't know how true it is. But I have read that.
But I would be safe in Iran as a trans person. But if I was gay, I wouldn't be safe there. But but I think so. I don't believe that can be said of the majority of young trans people, that they were secretly gay and couldn't handle it. I do think it needs to be not investigated, but it needs to be explored. The fact that a huge percentage of them are neurodiverse, and that's been my experience and encounter, having worked with from youth through to late 20s.
Just jumping on that point, actually. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Just jumping on that point, it has been said, and you've probably seen this yourself online, that being trans or believing you're trans or whatever term you want to use, it's a mental health condition.
Well, it technically, or no, was. It's in.
But then again, being gay was classed as
So my wife is a psychiatrist, and in what's called the DSM, it lists various categories of mental illness and disorder, and being gay was a mental disorder. And when they started to take it out, I think in the 70s, it took them about 20 years to gradually remove it completely. And then in the same way, being trans was a variously called disorder, and has had an evolution of language, from gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria to gender incongruence, and prior to that, transvestic fetishism, transsexualism, and all these other language. And that language has been around for, some of it for 100 years. And it has evolved. And I think the way, once you demedicalize it, depathologize it, that's the word, and you stop treating it as like a medical sin, mental health is still a taboo. It's a stigma.
It is, yeah.
And I think when trans were the minority, they were the special cases, they were the sympathy cases, if you want to call it that. There was a case of, and when I went to a psychiatrist 20 years ago nearly, to say, look, I think I might be trans, but I'm not sure I want to be trans, he literally said to me, "You're the most reluctant transsexual I've ever met." But he was treating around 70 to 100 a year in Norwich 18 years ago, back when the NHS said there should only be 11.
Trans people.
Yeah. But back when the NHS said there should only be 11, he said, well, I'm treating 100, so the stats are wrong.
Cooking the books.
Yeah. So the very fact that the stats have escalated is partly true, but they haven't escalated from the original baseline, because the baseline was 10 times underreported to start with.
Right. Okay.
So there's always been trans people, but then when you give people actual options, and then when you have social media and education to talk about it, more people will come out. But I do think it should be, as I say, slowly explored, the intersection with mental health, the intersection with neurodiversity, and potentially the intersection with, have you actually fathomed out what your sexuality is yet? Those are all things that need to be taken slowly and not rushed into.
All right. Okay. So what is your opinion on, I can't remember the name now, this escaped me, and I was just thinking of this question as well. I can't use the word on YouTube, but it was the Scottish who all of a sudden was trans when he saw the inside of a courtroom.
Can we say the person's name, Isla?
Yes, you can say the name. I just can't say what they've done, because YouTube don't like it.
Yeah, well, my personal opinion is nobody who's committed sexual violence towards a woman should be anywhere near women in that sense. So in that sense, I don't care. This is where, again, it doesn't sound like I'm even standing up for human rights at that point. I do believe all prisoners should be allowed to vote, but I don't believe prisoners who have committed sexual violence towards women should be allowed in the women's estate of prisons, even if they're trans in that sense. There are now something like 250 trans people in the prison estate, and that's enough to have their own prison, and then have different security levels within it. And that would, to me, be a solution. I think if you are a trans woman who transitioned 20 years ago, had the op, did everything, and you're in prison for, say, fraud, there's a different level of risk, i.e. minimal. And also you don't have the physical capacity in the same way. some women would say that all men have the capacity physically to overpower women. I'm 5'6". I literally was talking to someone just before doing this podcast who said to me, "I'm stronger than you, Katie. I can fight you on this," and it was a woman. And literally, and so I know that I could easily be eaten up by some strong women. So I don't think we can make that generalization that all men are stronger than all women. It's not always true. I've seen athletes, but I think if we weren't living in the last 5 years of controversy, and we were like 10 years ago, I would have think then people who haven't committed sexual violence, people who've had the op, it would have been okay for them to be in a women's prison. I do believe now it's untenable. The atmosphere, the environment, the way everything is right now, it's not doable. And the easiest solution is a third estate for trans people. I don't think they're safe back in the male estate. I also used to joke about it, and I'm not entirely not joking about it. Anyone in the male estate who suddenly turns around and says to their brief, "By the way, I'm trans," and no one ever knew anything about it until right now, say, absolutely fine that you want to be trans. We can arrange your op on Monday. And the number of them will say, "Oh, no, I didn't mean it. You offer them a quick op, they're not going. You can test someone's resolve by offering them to remove their anatomy at that point."
That's interesting.
It's not ethical, clearly, but it would be kind of an interesting test of resolve.
Why is it when, and it's not the case for all trans people, but when I'm going to trip over the terminology, but when a man transitions to a woman, why is it statistically a lot of them keep their manhood?
Multiple reasons. One
because
is
women don't have them.
Well, no, they're kind of getting phalloplasties, but getting a phalloplasty, one, they're about 5 to 10 times more expensive than
what I mean is
losing it.
A biological woman doesn't have one of those.
No. Yeah. Well, okay. So yeah. Unless you're Keir Starmer trying to answer the question, 99.5% of women don't have. 100% don't have. That's fine. I can call a spade, or a woman, or the 5 letter word beginning with T as well. But one of the reasons for it is it was on average something like it took me 8 years to have surgery. There's a long wait.
Right. Okay.
2, you've got a high chance of losing your sexual libido anyway by going on hormones, and then definitely losing your anatomy. Whilst your post-operative anatomy may function, you probably would have lost a lot of libido. I've had no interest in sex for the last 9 years or longer now. So for those that want a sexual life but also want a new body, you often don't get both. So I think some people choose to keep it because they still enjoy the sexuality of their anatomy, even if they have a dysphoria around who they want to be. And that's why they used to talk about different kinds of transsexual, transvestite. There are those who feel they are the opposite sex and they do want to fully transition. There are those who like being seen and perceived as the opposite sex, but they want to keep their bodies. Some of this language is quite old school. It comes from a lot of the psychiatric studies from 20 to 50, even to 100 years ago. There are those who are in their heads so confused that they are another sex, and I've left it as another sex, so you can go both ways on this, male to female, female to male, that they invert their desire for an opposite or even the same sex, and they transfer it onto themselves.
Yeah.
So they're attracted to the idea of themselves as the very object of their desire. I mean, Freud has a field day talking about that kind of thing. And the people who coined the idea of autogynephilia, that attraction to the idea of yourself as a woman, etc. So I think putting all trans into one basket and saying they're all the same and they all have the same beliefs and purposes is anathema. There are as many ways and reasons to be trans and to not fully transition or to partially transition as there are different ways to be man and woman and gay, etc.
I did see a statistic, going back to again to the mental health aspect of being trans. I did see a statistic that if you use the LGBT as the cohort, so it's 100% in that cohort, right? The highest level of suicide comes from the trans. So if someone looks at themselves in the mirror and says, "I'm clearly not happy being a guy, I need to be a woman, or a woman and I need to be a guy," and then they still commit suicide, even after transitioning. Surely that wasn't the fix they were looking
for. 100%. There's a couple of caveats to that. One is that, yes, there are high suicidality tendencies, and I have a personal history of suicide as well, but it's not about being trans. It's been other reasons.
Okay.
But yeah, there is a high ideation around and action around suicide for trans people at various stages of their journey.
Why do you think that is?
Not big. Well, as I say, when you look in the mirror and you have a dissonance with who you see and / what you want to be or who you think you are, I think it's more than that. I think there's also a dissonance in the same way that a young teenage girl looks in the mirror and then looks at Instagram and goes, Instagram says I have to be like this, and the mirror says I'm like this. And then anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders come in. So I think to some extent, being trans for some people could be considered, so gender dysphoria, as it's called, could be seen as a subset of body dysmorphia.
Right. Okay.
So what you see and inhabit doesn't make sense to your brain. And what you're seeing is you see what you see in the mirror seems other than yourself. So, and I got asked this question actually when I was in Denmark and Sweden the last couple of weeks. Somebody asked me this question. It was brilliant. They said, so what gender does your internal narrator have? In other words, when you're listening to your own thoughts, when you're seeing the person inside your own head that's seeing out, as it were, when you're observing yourself, does that entity, does your id or ego have a gender? And I said, well, actually, I don't think it does. I think it's genderless. I think my thoughts don't have a gender, don't have a flavor to them that is gendered. And it's probably why I'm increasingly comfortable with calling myself a trans person, or as young people might use the vocabulary non-binary, because I just see myself as a human being.
So your internal monologue when you're thinking of things to yourself or reading a book, there's no male, masculine, or feminine to
exactly. And if I were to even project myself into a romance scene in a book or something like that, you're reading a book, you inhabit one of the characters. I guess to some extent I might see myself as more female than male in that role.
Right.
I have an abhorrence to seeing myself as male, I think. I have a very visceral rejection of male anatomy and the way it's been used to abuse others. People could say, well, why couldn't you just become a good man rather than reject men altogether? And I don't, hashtag not all men, I don't believe all men are bad, but I just couldn't hack it. I don't think living as male and hating myself being male, if that makes any sense. And I think in past centuries, I might have been, the only option might have been to be a eunuch or something to have neutralized myself, if that makes sense.
So, are you gay or straight? If you had to put yourself into a box.
Well, that would depend on what box that I'm in. Since in the law now, since the Supreme Court, I'm a biological male and I'm attracted to women primarily, that would make me straight again. If a year ago, Gender Recognition Act wise, that was said to all intents and purposes, you acquire the gender of your gender expression and identity, i.e. woman, and attracted to women, that would make me gay towards women. I have had sexual relations with guys, didn't like any of them. Well, not just the guys, but I meant the actual actions and all the rest of it. So I disliked male sex when I was male. And not because of a Christian viewpoint, but just I would say I can appreciate men. I can look at men and go, oh, you're attractive. I don't want to sleep with you. And I can look at women and go, oh, I wonder what it would be like sleeping with you, but actually I still have no actual desire to act on it. But I have acted on it more with women than men, substantially more, but also not in the last decade because I'm not interested in sex.
No,
but my aesthetic attraction is more towards women than men, but I can aesthetically appreciate men. I go, oh my God, I can see why people find you hot. You're an Adonis. You look beautiful. I would like to see you in a museum or an art gallery, but not in the bed.
I'm Michelangelo's David.
Yes. So I think I have an aesthetic attraction to all people. I think in the right circumstances, if sex was not part of the bargain, I could live with anyone.
Okay.
Although technically I don't want to live with anyone. I have my cats, so I'm very happy being a crazy cat person. So yeah, I don't think that the labelled language. So there was another. They used to have for a while a way of saying whom you're attracted to without actually revealing your actual own gender. So you'd be androphilic or gynophilic. I mean, you're attracted to men or attracted to women, but it doesn't reveal your gender. Whereas gay and lesbian and straight, it reveals the gender of the observer in that sense. But gynophilic and androphilic, in that sense, I'm gynophilic. I'm attracted to women.
Okay.
But it doesn't speak to who I am, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. And I think that's a great place to end. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.